throughout the course of this series. I'm Robert Grant, and this is Codex. I've had the opportunity to visit over 140 different countries. But when I went to Egypt and started traveling to all the ancient sites, I couldn't help but notice the numerous patterns that were left behind by the architects and builders in living stone. In 2019, I took a group to Egypt following the inscriptions left to us by Leonardo da Vinci, embedded inside the Vitruvian Man, as well as the La Belle Ferronnière, the portrait of Anne Boleyn, the mother of Queen Elizabeth I, as well as the Last Supper itself. We realized on that trip that the Last Supper was a working map of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. And we discovered, while there, 8 new stone reliefs in the actual King's Chamber itself.
Well, welcome everybody. This is the first time I have ever done this particular presentation, but I want it to be an interactive thing. Because frankly, when we get towards the end, I'm going to need help because I really don't know exactly how to interpret some of these messages that I'm going to share with you. It all started back in 1968 when these 20-something-year-old guys that all worked for that agency that I told you about, they would go on a relatively routine basis to Bannerman Island, which is in the Hudson River, north of New York City. I'm not sure how far it is, probably a 45-minute drive, maybe not even that. Anyway, Francis Bannerman was an arms dealer, and his father sold arms to both sides in the Civil War, and then he would sell to anybody. His son would sell to anybody that would buy from him. And anyway, he stored a bunch of ammunitions on the island. This is the island right there. You can see their estate up on the top of the hill. But that's the old castle, the original dwelling that goes back to the mid-1800s, and just behind it was where they stored all the munitions. Well, Francis Bannerman died in 1918, and the place fell into disrepair, and in 1925, the munitions blew up, and it was a huge explosion, and everything went into the water, right? And that's why these guys were up there in 1968, because they were looking for some of these ordnance that had been blown into the river, and they would take it down to the Bronx and they would pawn it for money. That's what they were doing up there. Well, anyway, our good friend Don Rue, and this is Don and I out in the woods in the Adirondacks at a treasure site that these documents led us to. And we found a treasure. Can't tell you about it yet, but it was like the most awesome day ever. And these documents led us there, and that's one of the reasons why I'm 100% confident that these documents are legitimate. There's a whole bunch of other reasons why I think that, but that's not the purpose of this lecture. So anyway, that's Don. That's him today. He's 80 years old. He's 6'8". He's been shot twice, and he's dealt with a lot of bad guys. In my mind, he's a hero. He's one of those guys that did work for our government and knew that he would never get recognition or credit for it publicly. So when he dies, I'm going to tell those stories because I know them all. Anyway, this is his best friend, Bill Jackson. These are the only pictures that we have of Bill. The one on the left is when he was 19 years old and he was just going into the military. He served in the Korean War. And the one on the right was in the late 90s, and he's actually wearing a disguise. He didn't have a mustache, but he does in that picture. Anyway, so what happened was they're out there and they're diving in the water looking for ordnance, and Don, I'm sorry?
What's ordnance?
Like munitions, weapons, bombs,
Okay, good.
you know,
Good, thanks.
yeah. Munitions. And so anyway, they were pawning them is what they were doing. So anyway, Don, and you'll see in this next picture, is standing on the shore of the mainland, on the shore of the river, where a lot of these things got blown that far. It's about a quarter mile from the island to the shoreline. And he was swimming along the shoreline and he found two of these decorative boxes that got blown off the island. And Mrs. Bannerman apparently was a gardener, and she had elaborate gardens, and these were ornaments that were on top of the fence posts, and they got blown into the water. So Don collected these, and he knew that Muriel, Bill's wife, was a gardener, so he gave them to Muriel. And a year later, in 1969, she had these things in the garden. Their 5-year-old son, Mark, was running around the garden. He grabbed one of these posts, and he pulled it off and broke it, and it hit the ground, and they realized that there was things in it. So this is Don standing at that location. Approximately, it's a little farther up the river, but that's as close as we could get. And he's holding one of the devices that was inside that decorative ornament. It's made of brass. It's about the size of a hockey puck, and you can kind of see that there's some strange symbols that were etched into the surface, both on the front and the back. And if you look right here, you can see these symbols. Those are Theban. That is the encrypted alphabet that the Templars used back in the day to encrypt their documents. You'll see a lot more of this. But anyway, that little circle right here with that pin sticking out went on here, and it came out that point. And what this says in Theban is to open, push the pin. And that's how you get in there. There were a number of metal inserts that were inside of it. I'm not going to go into all that stuff, but it had stuff in it. And anyway, that's how this whole thing got started.
Where's the locale?
Pardon me?
Where's the location? Locale?
In the middle of the Hudson River.
It's in the middle of the Hudson River, maybe 45 minutes north of New York City. Yeah, Hudson River's big. And Bannerman Island, actually now you can take boat cruises out there, and you can go out on the island, and they give tours out there. Anyway, so that's how this whole thing started. Now this device I'll talk about in a sec, but there was something else inside that decorative ornament. It was a clay tube that was sealed on both ends with beeswax. And inside that clay tube were 2 animal skin parchments. And these are pictures of those 2 documents. And you'll notice they're covered in Theban script. That's that script that was on the outside of the device. Actually, that device is a navigation device, but we're not going to go into that tonight. This story is so complicated. I mean, it is so complicated. It's the most difficult forensic investigation I've ever done, and I'm still working on it, and I've been working on it since 2006. It's just amazing. Anyway, so there's Don again, he and I at the Newport Tower when we were filming an episode of the show a few years ago. And as I told you, he worked for a private security company starting in 1961 to 1994 is when they sunsetted the company and sold the stock and shuttered it. Bill joined in 1962 when he got out of the military. They were best friends. And that's why Don, well, the reason Don always was available to go is because he never got married and never had kids. His mother and his sister, who was mentally challenged, died young. His father died in 1965. He has nobody. Basically, I'm his family. Anyway, so he was always available to go on these expeditions with his friend Bill. I think I told you guys that he discovered a ship that is mentioned in the document in 1971 up on the southern coast of Newfoundland. We're going to go back and re-find that ship. Now, Don was there. I have his notebook. I was going to put those pages in here, but I didn't because it's just too much. But if we find a 12th century Templar ship, again, that they already found, imagine that. What are those academics going to say now? Yeah, exactly. Boom. They also went up on Hunter Mountain, where the Temple of the Goddess is, that you're going to hear about in these inscriptions or these encrypted messages. In 1977, they found the tomb of Altamara, where she was buried. She was the navigator of the 6-ship flotilla that came over here in 1177 to 1180. When Bill died in 2000, his family in 2004 bequeathed everything to Don. They gave him everything. And all his research, and believe it or not, the first document that we're going to look at was decoded by Bill Jackson. He transcribed it out of the 3 different languages that it was encrypted in, and then he typed it out and he put it on a floppy disk, and he hid it behind a picture that he gave to Don before he died. And there's a long story that goes with it, but Don was getting ready in 2008 to throw that picture away, and when he went to take it out of his shed, the frame broke, and he discovered the floppies on the back. Otherwise, who knows what might not have happened. And there's a reason why Bill never told him. But again, I'm not going to go into all those details. You can read about it in Cryptic Code if you want. Anyway, so what happened is Bill did all this stuff in the field, and in the around 1980, he made a decision that he was going to write a book about all this stuff. So he started to interact with the academics, and we all know how that went, right? And I've read the stories about his interactions. One of those guys was a guy by the name of Barry Fell. Have you guys ever heard of him? He wrote a very famous book in 1976 called America BC. He was the first academic to actually write about pre-Columbian contact, which even to this day academics will not acknowledge. And Bill went to him to help him decode these documents, and Fell kept it and wasn't going to give it back to him. Not a good idea to mess with a spy. He got it back. In any case, this is the kind of experience that he had. I can certainly appreciate that. And so he said, screw it, I'm going to write a novel. And he started to write that novel. And one of the things that he did, I'm telling you I'm spilling some tea here because it's kind of cool tea. He wrote this, he started working on this novel, and he incorporated the story of the Oak Island mystery into his story. Now this is back in the 80s, long before the Curse of Oak Island. And he actually created a map as part of his novel. And when Zena Halpern, if you watch the show at all, decided she didn't want to work with Don anymore because he did all this horrible, she found this justification to do what she ended up doing, which was completely unethical, and I told her not to do it. In any case, Don slipped her this map as a test, and she went running to the brothers, right? And they've been using it ever since. That map is fake.
Nice.
So, in any case, but Don knew that, I knew that, she didn't. So, and the brothers still don't know that to this day. But if you see him, you can tell them now.
Which map was it? Is the one that
It's the one of Oak Island. It's got the French on it. It's got the fish symbol on it. Yeah. Zena brought it to him. There's another map that she brought to him before that. That one's legit. And I'll show you that one in a sec. Okay. And I think I read this to you guys. The political situation will improve. We were filming this as he read this, and he's sitting there, and Bill will be disappointed. It was funny. Anyway, so the document. These are pictures that Bill took back in the late 70s of the document. This is one of the pictures of the title page. And there's some really interesting crosses there, which I don't have time to go into. But the one on the lower left and the upper right with the 5 dots. Now the Roman Church will tell you that that is the 5 wounds of Christ cross, right? Of course, they've always got an explanation. But that cross means something else to Templars like me, and it actually is the cross that the Atlanteans used way back when. But I digress. Anyway, that's Latin for the truth will set you free. The document is comprised of reports, like this one. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. Maps, letters, and all kinds of encrypted documents like that. You see those symbols? I don't know what the hell they are either. But anyway, and I think I talked to you guys about this map 8. You guys remember that? With the 13 parts and then the long narrative on the back. What we know is that in 1908, the Cremona document was copied for the last time by a guy whose initials were CLY. His ancestors that also did this work for the Templars also used the same pseudonym name, Clyphus, but they spelled Licinius different, and they also made their siglas different. And you can see those 3 siglas right here. See that? And they're all different, and they represent different ages when they did their work. And we talked about it. So, let's talk about these encrypted documents. So, in the 12th century, late 12th century, Sir Ralph de Sudley led an exhibition of 6 ships, 144 men and women. Their navigator was Altamara. They got her in Denmark, and Ponce de Leon, not the explorer you're thinking of, a guy about 400 years earlier, was required by the king of Denmark. Valdemar said, somebody's got to marry her, otherwise she's not going anywhere. So he did. Anyway, so she was the navigator. They came over to North America. They got off at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, and they hiked 26 people, 2 times 13, to the Temple of the Goddess. Their mission was to recover those scrolls. I told you the story about the ritual, the 3-day and night ritual that Sir Ralph de Sudley had to go through to earn the right to get those scrolls. And on the 3rd night, when the priestess offered herself, he said, I can't, I've taken vows of chastity. And she said, you pass. And then he was able to take half of the scrolls. There's a whole nother story about the other half, which we're not going to go into. Anyway, so those documents that he grabbed, he took with him, and eventually in 1180 he got back to Italy, at Saborga, Italy, where his deposition was taken. And that deposition is called A Year We Remember. And he talks about the mission, right? That is what Bill Jackson decoded and typed out and put behind the picture on the floppy disk. And that's the thing that we read. And when we got that, we're like, holy shit, this is amazing. Now what you're looking at here is a picture of the Cremona document that Bill took back in the late 70s. And on the left is what we call the Bernard de Clairvaux cryptogram. And you see a bunch of Greek-looking letters in a box up there. And if you look on the top, you'll see those crazy symbols that were in the previous photo. This is the key to decoding that particular cryptogram, which is about 6 pages long. After it was decoded, he wrote out the list. On the right, that's the list of the documents that de Sudley recovered in French. It's written in French. It's kind of interesting too that if you look closely, it says Bernard de Clairvaux. Remember I talked about Bernard and how he was the charismatic leader of the Templars. He wrote the charter for the Templars, for the Cistercians. And if you look here, this is 1118.
Well, you were talking about this disc.
Oh, the disc. So what happened is, yeah, in addition to the deposition, Bill Jackson wrote an 11-page narrative about his whole experience with this document. And it's brilliant. It's great. But one of the things that he did in the narrative, or in the document, he says the first page is missing. So we just assumed it was gone. And then it goes into the story. And he sold it to the Vatican in 1994. But what he didn't tell anyone, and we didn't know until 2017, when Bill's daughter Melissa was moving from Ireland to Scotland to be with her brother Mark. Remember the 5-year-old that broke the box, the ornament? she found these papers that her father had given her. And there was a letter in there. It said, if anything happens to me, make sure Don Rue gets this. That was in 1996. And Don got it in 2017. And one of the things that was in that envelope was this page right here, which was the first page that he said was missing. He was lying. He didn't want the Vatican to know. Why do you think that was? The reason is, this is the cipher phrase that you have to decode the document. So he sold the Vatican a worthless document.
Oh my God.
I love this guy. So it's all in Theban, right? The other thing that's on the back is a map of how and where they got in Jerusalem. Hi, ladies. To get down to the ritual chamber where they found those ossuaries, remember, with the stuff in it? So this page is critical, and he pulled it out, gave it to his daughter, and in the letter he says, if anything happens to me, make sure it gets to Don Rue. It only took about 25 years, but he got it, you know. Anyway, so that's cool. Now there's a bunch of other cool documents that are in this book. Like this one here, which is maps of the world. And this is an obelisk in Egypt, I mean right in the middle here. And you can read my book if you want, and I talk about all this stuff. But what's interesting is that obelisk, and I forget which one it is, I think it's Amenhotep or something. But anyway, the top, which is a pyramid, right, came off. And inside, there were scrolls hidden inside of it that contained maps of the world. That capstone, that pyramid at the top of that obelisk was stolen in 300 BC. This is the obelisk that's in Paris, France right now. How many have been to Paris and seen this obelisk? What's unique about it? It's got a gold top, right? Remember?
Is this a plastic Concord, or I know there's an obelisk there, do you know where?
It's right in the middle of Paris. There's a big circle there.
It's plastic Concord.
Yeah, that's it. But it's got a gold dome because the top is missing because it was stolen. And the reason it was stolen because it had maps. That's what the Cremona document tells us. That's just one of the things it tells us. How cool is that? This document is in there. Theban, right? It's all, we've had everything decoded.
Do you know the date of these documents?
What do you guys, pardon me?
The origin date of the documents, of these maps and things?
These are all, of these maps here
Yeah, the maps that were originally. in
that
the
were
document.
taken, we don't have them. They were stolen. This just tells you what happened to them, and it tells you what was in them.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah.
So it tells you what was in the maps?
They were maps of the world.
Maps of the world?
Mm-hmm.
But the
Because people were navigating the world a long time ago. And this sort of gets into the, well, how do they know this level of detail, right? And we'll get into that later.
So it's
But
not
just,
the actual map, which map or whatever, we don't know the details.
nope,
Information of the
they're gone. They're gone. We don't know who has them. They disappeared 2,300 years ago. In any case, on the far right, you guys see anything that looks kind of vaguely familiar? What?
You're saying
Somebody said it. Yeah. You know what this page is?
oh, in the bottom.
It's the secret of the Ark of the Covenant, which isn't where it is. It's how to make one. That's what this tells us. And we've decoded this. We know how to do it.
Wow. What does the Ark of the Covenant do? I heard it was a weapon.
It's a power source.
Powers.
Power source, yeah.
A communication device.
Pardon me?
A communication device, isn't it?
Yeah. At the end of the day, it can be used for that, yeah.
Just a suggestion, maybe.
Pardon me?
The Alexandrians were noted, any ship that came in with documents, they'd steal them and copy them and give them back. Maybe
Yeah.
it was stolen in Alexandria.
Well, that's what Napoleon did when he raided the Vatican. He took all those documents out. Most people don't know this, and he recopied everything and gave it back. So we have all that stuff. I mean, they're just...
Who's we?
Hmm?
Who's we?
That's a great question.
Who's we?
In any case, I can't answer that right now. Anyway, a year we remember is amazing. Now that's where the Temple of the Goddess is. I'm standing on a prominent spot, and it's remote as hell to this day. But there's carvings there, there's caves there. You go back to where the people lived, there's all kinds of structures that like you can't believe.
Where is that?
It's in upstate New York,
Hunter Mountain?
near Hunter Mountain. Yeah. It's not on Hunter Mountain, but it's near Hunter Mountain. Yep. 3-year voyage, 6 ships, I told you that, led by Altamara from Denmark. 26, she led him to the Temple of the Goddess in the land called Onteora. That's what they called North America back then. And then he sailed back and gave his deposition. So, going back to that Bernard cryptogram, these are the pictures that Bill took. Everything that he sold to the Vatican, he took pictures of. So we still have the information. We just don't have those parts of the document. He had to give them something, right? But we have it all. And they don't have the key parts. And they don't have the part that tells you how to decode this. I was so mad when I first heard that. I mean, Bill, what's the matter with you? You took the money, dude. But he screwed the Vatican too.
So this document had nothing to do with the Sinclair's diary? Or
No, they do. It's all connected. They all intertwine. That's a whole nother lecture I'll do another time. But they do, yes, absolutely. But these are older than those. So once you decode them, you end up with this list in French, and then in English, it looks like this. And there's a lot of really cool stuff on there. Heavenly iron, that's meteorites. How to drink the sea, that's basically a distillery. That would be helpful. And actually, there's a page in that document that is as a drawing of how to make it. But I want to point out this one right here.
How to enter the land of invisibility?
A contract of marriage with Yeshua ben Yosef and Mariamne a Hasmonia at Cana. So he says in the deposition, the most important thing we got was the marriage document of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Secret love potions. The gospel of wisdom. The magical device to show the movement of stars and planets. The gospel of Miriam. Yeah, there's a lot of information. Secrets of Moses' Ark. I just showed you that picture. These are the documents that he got. There's a lot of stuff he didn't get. He only got half the scrolls. Okay, so this is another document that was tucked inside the book, and we have this page too. He didn't give that back. He didn't give that to the Vatican. He pulled it out. But that's an interesting cryptogram, and it just uses a code word, Quetzalcoatl. It's not spelled correctly, but because it needed to be a certain number of letters, it's spelled wrong, but you get the point, right? So the code word is Quetzalcoatl, and what you do is you number the letters alphabetically. So I think I've got them here. Yeah. So the first, number 1, you start with the letter A. So you go through your code word till you hit A, and when you hit that, give it a 1, under that number. Now if there's another A, that would be 2, right? So then you go through, and then you go B, and there's no B in there. Then you go to C. Here's a C right here, so that's 2. D, E, and you just do it numerically, and wherever it is, you put the number until you get all 11 in this case. So then what you do is you take the 7th group, and then there's 5 rows, and so what you do is you align them vertically. That's the way they are, but you align them vertically. and then you read the message going across. Does that make sense? Yeah, good luck, right? Yeah. It's hard. But once you know how to do it, well, once you know how to do anything, it's not hard, right? But that's, and then you decipher the message horizontally. So you take these rows and you put them vertically. This one goes like that. This one you go on and you just keep adding them like that. And then you just line them up. You have to use grid paper. And so they're all lined vertically, but then you read the message horizontally. And it's all scripto continuum. There's no breaks in the words, so you got to figure out what the words are. It's hard. But this is the message. Sailing directions to the land of timbers, fur, fish, and fierce feathers people, and of Onteora. So one is South America, the other is North America. The storehouse of ancient knowledge, that's the temple of the goddess. 3 Oas from the pillars of Hercules. I think that's weeks, but I'm not sure. That didn't really decode very well. Southwest, 6 suns, south-southeast to the Trident Islands. Southwest here, 2 suns east is the land of riches, apes, and temples. But go west 1 moon to a river of blood-colored birds and more temples. So that's going from, the eastern South America to the Gulf to Central America. So they knew how to get here. And that was sacred information. They probably followed the currents. They probably knew what time of year to go, and they were coming over here all the time, for crying out loud. These are some of the maps that Bill sold, but I will tell you this, on map 8 that has 13 parts, there were 4 maps that were drawn out like this. Look at the detail on those things. I mean, and if you look up at the top, upper right of this one, this is the map they've been using on Oak Island for 10 years. And they're not supposed to have this. Zena basically stole it from Don and gave it to them. And of course, she took credit for it. I'm so irritated with her. Anyway, but it's this map that they're using. This is Nova Scotia divided into 2 parts. There's Mahone Bay right there, probably pointing out Oak Island. And there's a bunch of information here, but what they did not get is, you notice these numbers right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a little hooked X right there, and there's a hooked X up here in the date of 1179. That's talking about the Sudley's trip. This is the map that accompanies that narrative. And I'll get to the notes. She got the map, but Zena never saw the notes because they came later. And then that is, this is the northern end, northeastern end of Long Island. See that? And then that's southern Connecticut right there. That map over there. I don't want to go into all of that, but if you look at the top 2, you see the CLY? The little sigla, the top? The page number is boxed, and underneath it is the CLY. And that was the old CLY, the first Clyphus. That's his CLY. And there's another hooked X. And actually that circle with the 2 lines, horizontal lines, that's a symbol for eclipses. And they use that for eclipses. You can use for calculating longitude because it's a timing thing and you can measure longitude. So don't believe it when you read that longitude wasn't discovered until 1683 or whatever it is. That's bullshit too. So these are the notes that came from John Drake's estate when he died in 2020. And all the numbers on those maps that nobody knows what those numbers are, these are the notes that go with them. Now I'm covering up something really important on the right side. I just can't tell you about it because I don't want anybody going there. But these are the notes. And CLY, see at the top of both of them? That was done later. And there's a hooked X right there.
Now,
Every page has a hooked X.
so is this encrypted?
This is not encrypted. This is just in French. It's all written in French. Now on the back, you probably remember I showed you this picture here. And remember I told you that there was a map there, but I couldn't show you? Well, I'm going to show you now. That's the date that's over on the right. And this corresponds to when they were laying out the alignments for the Newport Tower, for all the astronomical alignments. So that's why we say that it was built around 1400. It took a while for those alignments to be incorporated, and building that structure took a lot of engineering, a lot of materials, a lot of people, because it's big. And there's another hooked X right there. Now this is another picture of that I took. You see the map? You can see it's there, right? But you can't see what's there because I can't show you what's there. But it's there. Isn't that cool? Yeah. And we have about 6 of these, what I call invisible maps. Okay, here's another one that we just got in January. So, and I'm kind of jumping around because I didn't know how to put this thing together. But there were about 5 colleagues that Bill disseminated important parts of the document to, and they all died in the last 6 years. And Don is literally the last man standing. So that picture, remember that picture of Don and I together, that selfie I took with him? So we had a heart-to-heart talk right at that moment because we had just found this treasure. And I said, Don, are we done? He said, I said, is there anyone left that Bill might have given something to? And he said, the only guy that's still living, Bill didn't get along with it. He wouldn't have given him anything. And then he sat and thought for a moment, and he goes, there might be one more person. I said, well, who's that? Bill had a girlfriend. Her name is Roberta, and she's 81 years old. And she's still living, and she recently had a stroke because we found her. And guess what? The goddess had the best stuff. I'm not kidding. Holy crap. And it came in 2 parts. The first part was this and a map that I can't show you. This is one of the pages, and this is the alphabet, and don't even try because you'll never get it. But we figured it out because Don had some old stuff and we were able to piece it together. But this is the message. The power of God is within you. This is the final writing of this report. First done in 1308. That's a year after the Templars were put down. And revised 3 times till 1908. And everything that we have in the Cremona document is consistent with that date. The science stuff we've been able to do. The final putting of the relic is told here, 1597. So let's just stop for a second. What's a relic? And what relic are they talking about?
The Grail?
Yep. So what is it?
Where is it? The Grail?
What is it?
It's Mary Magdalene.
That's one interpretation, but that's not what he's talking about.
Grail.
So if you remember when I gave the lecture and I talked about how the Templars went under the south wall into that ancient Christian ritual chamber, and there were 4 ossuaries. Do you remember this one?
Yeah. John the Baptist, right?
John the Baptist. And what happened to him?
Beheaded.
right? So remember I taught you about the skull and crossbones? You know whose skull that is on that flag? It's John the Baptist. In our lodges in Freemasonry, they're all dedicated to the Holy Saint John, not Jesus. Because John's the guy, not Jesus. Isn't that crazy? So the relic is pretty important in this message, isn't it? In 1304, Louis de Grimard, by order of Grand Master Jacques de Molay, arranged for 3 ships to embark from La Rochelle to Local de Ramsey and Pointe d'Air and Leith de Sedel in the Isle of Man. If you go straight north from La Rochelle, you run right into the Isle of Man. 3 different ports. That's where the Templars fled. Now you know. The world doesn't know this stuff. Anyway, there's a whole bunch more really good information in here.
But where is the Isle of Man? It's in the
You know where Scotland and the UK are?
Yeah,
You know where Ireland is?
yeah.
Right there. Right in the middle.
In the Irish Sea.
Yep.
Irish Sea.
So when you go right north from La Rochelle, it goes right there.
They were going there to escape to the Catholic Church.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. John the Baptist.
But they knew that wasn't far enough.
Pardon me?
So they knew that wasn't far enough. That's the reason they were.
Well, that's their first stop.
First stop.
Yeah. There's more, it tells us more, and it's coded, but we know where they went.
Yeah.
We know exactly what they did. Anyway, so Dan Spartan, I told you guys this was the guy who started the agency that they worked for. And this guy wrote me a bunch of letters when I started working with Don, and he threatened my life. He said, if you pull something like Zena Halpern did, you're going to be dead. And I'm not kidding. He did. He threatened my life. Of course I'm not going to do that. I actually took it as a compliment. I did. And I said to Don, I said, I would love to meet this guy because I've read so much of the reports that he wrote, how smart he was. It was brilliant how he faked his death. And then he disappeared to Southeast Asia. That's where he retired. But he was writing these letters to us, and they would go through intermediaries, the network he called it, so that there's no way we could track him down. Guy's so smart. He paid for all of it. So what happened, I'm just going to tell you the story because it's really sad. But so back in like the 80s, he took a bullet fragment, a ricochet in his knee, and it bothered him forever after that. So he had multiple knee surgeries, but it never really was right. And then in the early 2000s, he got a knee replacement. That got infected. He got another knee replacement. And then at Christmas time, well, before Christmas in November, he sent some photographs of Map 8. We didn't know what it was at the time, but it turned out to be photographs of parts of Map 8. And I recognized some of the stuff in the pictures. It's like redrawings of some of those maps we just looked at with more information. And I'm like, holy crap, is he going to send you that, Don? Well, I don't know. So I'm like, oh my God. I mean, I was just like foaming, right? So around Christmas time, actually it was December 27th, Dan called Don. This is 2020. And they had a 3-hour conversation. And it turned out to be the last time they ever talked. Because Dan was going to get his leg amputated on February 21st. And he told Don he didn't know if he was going to survive it. Because 79 years old, it was bad, you know. So then Don calls me after they have this conversation. I'm like, Don, you got to get an affidavit from him because these things clearly were written on paper. I said, no one's going to believe these ancient maps are written on frickin' wrapping paper. Well, I can't get a hold of them. And I'm like, oh, shit. So anyway, On March 21st, I think it was, we get this box. Don gets this box. And it was inside of a cardboard box, and on the top was an envelope, and in there was a letter from Dan's wife telling Don about Dan's death. He died the day before he was to be airlifted to get his leg amputated. He died of sepsis. But what he did was he made this box. It's a puzzle box. And Don had to figure out how to open it. It was kind of a thing that they had, right? Don was really good at puzzles, and so we had to figure out how to open it. And he did, of course. But this letter was so sad. And his wife, Lila, he met at a wedding when he got over there, and they got married. And it turns out he recopied Map 8 with his 15-year-old son. It took him 6 months to do it. But anyway, we opened the box. This is the only picture of John Drake that exists. Don would be mad if I was showing this, but you can't see much. It's shitty, but that's the best I can do. These guys did not let people take pictures of them. So we open it, and the first thing that came out was an affidavit telling us how he did the map, and it's 2 pages long, signed by 4 people, a lawyer. That's how smart this guy was. He knew that we needed that, and he put it in there just in case, and just in case happened. That's how smart this guy was. Anyway, so one of the things that came out of the Spartan box, we call it, is this cryptogram. And we call it the Zodiac cryptogram. So you can see there's a wheel with 12 points and the 12 signs of the Zodiac, right? And then you see a bunch of letters there. That's an anagram right here. Okay? You guys know what an anagram is? It's basically a word, and you take the letters and you scramble them all up, and then you have to figure out what the word is, or the phrase. In this case, we figured it out, Don and I, working together. The phrase is New Amsterdam, which is what they called New York before it was New York. Did you guys know that? Yeah. Anyway, so then what you do is the same thing. You figure out the anagram code word, or words. In this case, there's the anagram, and there's the code word. Then you put the numbers above in the same way that we did it before. So A, you got 1 here, 2, and so on, right? So then in numerical sequence, you find the zodiac symbol. So if it's 7, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then you go to that long list, you find that zodiac symbol, you take those letters in a line, you put them vertically, and you go through the whole thing, and then you read it across horizontally. And that's how you get your message. Line them vertically on grid paper, decipher the message using the letters horizontally. This message gives us the history of the Cremona document. The document has been removed from the Vatican Library's secret archives by Brother Schoner, a Cistercian legate of Fidenzio of Padua of Helvetia, then to Lisbon by Brother Andrew Michael Ramsey. Now, Andrew Michael Ramsey in Freemasonry is a very important guy because it was either in the late 1600s or 1700s, because the other guy did the same thing, but it was a century earlier. I think this was in the late 1700s. He gave a lecture, and it's called Ramsey's Oration. And he made the argument that modern Freemasonry evolved from medieval Knights Templarism, which is true, which is obvious now based on these documents and the journals. But he couldn't tell anyone. He had this document. He had the evidence. He knew it was true. And people criticized him because he didn't have the evidence. But he did. He just couldn't show anybody at the time. And now we know. It's like, oh, that damn boy, he had it all the time. And the Masonic scholars now that we've shared this with are like, okay, he was right. Anyway, to the Order of St. Lazarus in 1680, moved to England 1730, Samuel Pritchard. He also gave an oration making the same argument, criticized for the same thing. It was about 100 years earlier. Hidden in Wales by Gwadine Roche, then moved to London, George Cruikshank, who had it bound in a volume titled Sir John Falstaff. That's the Cremona document. That's the book that CLY copied it into. The book was published in 1858. By the way, Sir John Falstaff is a fictional character created by Shakespeare. And Cruikshank was an artist in the mid-1800s who did all the illustrations in this book. But the copy of this book that they put the Cremona document in, they wrote the maps and was blank. It was a blank copy. Copied by Grand Lodge of Denmark, then the Lodge of Prince Edward Island, by Lionel de Waldern, June 24, 1875, after which it passed to the hands of Olaf Palm, Lespierre Chatura by Vitruvius, and lost to time. Don't bother looking this stuff up. We've already looked. They don't have it. Those lodges don't have it. You guys couldn't look it up anyway. They wouldn't let you in. They wouldn't talk to you, let alone show you anything. But this is our work right here. See how we put them in the rows? And then you read the message this way. Remember those two parchments? So this will freak you out. If you're a Christian, if you're a Roman Christian, just leave the room. So this is this alphabet, right? This is the Theban alphabet. This has been used since about, well, at least since 1200.
What country of origin is this? I've never heard of this, Stephen.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a combination of things, but you notice how there's a lot of M's? Remember I taught you the M sign? Yeah. Well, there's a reason. It has to do with the Magdalene. But that's the alphabet right there. Okay? And it's a one-to-one letter substitution. So whatever symbol it is, A, B, C, it's pretty easy. Once you convert them to letters, then you got to figure out the language, and then you convert it to English or whatever. So this is the message. And Misha, the daughter of Elizabeth, sister of John. Now the reason this document is so important is because there's people mentioned here that aren't mentioned in the Bible. Like this sister of John the Baptist, nobody knew he had a sister, let alone what her name was. Of the river Jordan, took the red wine with the poppy in it, having been there for 7 days, and gave it to the soldiers, saying, a gift from the Arimathian. They drugged him. Poppy. It's a narcotic. Then came Ishmael, the brother of Benjamin, and the Magdala. We didn't know the Magdalene had two brothers. And there they are. The soldiers are asleep. They took him out and put him on a stretcher. Who is him?
John the Baptist.
Jesus. She said, fold the headcloth alone. We lift up Jesus and took him to sleep with his ancestors, but Ishmael with his new beard stayed. They did the switcheroo. We have destroyed all trace of our being here. We are unclean. We fled Jerusalem, and all of Judea was against us. We fled to the north, always Thendra. I have no idea who that is. But this is an alternate, probably true story of the resurrection. And the Templars had it. because this is their family heritage, their bloodline descendants. So who else? Remember I told you 2 days ago about the Templar tomb? And who's in there? And who took the bones? They were responsible for their own family members, right? So this was those two parchments on the front and back. It's the same message, but one is in French and one is in Portuguese. But it's the same message.
And that's what those scrolls were.
That's what those scrolls were. They were inside the clay tube that was inside the decorative ornament that blew off the island. Seriously. Now, we don't have these parchments. I asked Don, I said, where's the originals? He said, Jackson sold them. He wanted the money, right? But he took pictures. I mean, I'd love to have the originals, but pictures are the next best thing. And it took a lot of work for this to be decoded. And there's a whole sequence of letters between experts and guys in Portugal that the guys in the agency used to decode all this stuff. Anyway, I've never shown this before. Crazy, huh? Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Book of the Wars of the Lord. Go ahead.
What does it mean when they said they took Jesus out to sleep with his ancestors?
To be dead with his ancestors, to put him in the Templar tomb, to go sleep with his family.
So Jesus was dead.
Yeah.
And his twin was the...
Pardon me?
And he had a twin.
Well, somebody was in his place, but I've talked to biblical scholars about this. The fact that the soldiers fell asleep and then they woke up and realized that he was gone, they were in deep shit. So they didn't say anything, is what they say. They're not going to say anything. Yeah, that's him. That's him. But he was alive. He was resurrected. Right? Because it was him. And
somebody in his place, was he dead or alive?
Jesus was dead, but the guy who took his place was alive. Hence the resurrection, right?
Gotcha. Okay, I was okay. Now I got it. It's complicated.
Because they didn't want the Romans to have him. Apparently, it was their family member. And the guy that was alive probably just said, get the hell out of here. But maybe they're the ones that said, yeah, he just rose up and took off. I mean, I don't know. We're trying to interpret this. We've had all kinds of debates with these biblical scholars. You can just see their heads are like, boom. Because like I said, there's people in here that aren't in the Bible that nobody ever knew about. And they're telling us who they are. And there's, and these scholars are all saying, yeah, well, they probably did have brothers and sisters, but because they weren't part of the important part, they weren't important to the stories told in the Bible, they just weren't mentioned. Didn't mean they didn't have brothers and sisters. They did. Right? That's why this is so amazing. I mean, just one of the reasons why. Okay, the Book of the Wars of the Lord. Now, this piece is one of two parts that we have. This was just folded up and shoved in the book. And Bill took a bunch of pictures of this. This is 3 different pictures to show the whole thing. So it was written in the Book of the Wars of the Lord. That's at the end of the back. Now, I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I'm going to show you the stuff that resonated with me. Now, you remember the hooked X, right? And how the Templars venerated the goddess, right? They embraced an ancient faith that elevated the feminine aspect of the Godhead, right? To at least an equal level, but probably up here because women are the life givers, right? Still are. Now, if you Google this right now, this is what you'll get. No copies of this exist anywhere in the world.
I was going to ask you in that document when you talk about that, it's just a reference to it, not that you actually have the Book of the Lord.
Well, we have part of the contents of it.
Okay.
But hold that thought. We'll get there. So, no known copy to exist. And why would that be? Because you know who is going to make damn sure that there isn't any copies, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? We're talking about the church, okay? Well, you're about to see why they don't want this in the Bible and to be anywhere in the world. Right here. Now, there's a bunch of stuff we're not going to go into. The goddess Wisdom, the goddess Wisdom has commanded us, and we have obeyed. But we set not foot into Edom. Then a cloud descended from heaven, and out from the cloud. These are the people of the Lord, and I am their goddess. You will depart this place or be destroyed, for I do battle this day for the sons of Dan. Now, as you keep reading in here, it's pretty obvious that she's on an equal level with my Lord. Can't have that in the Bible, can you? A little farther down. The leader, okay, now just so you know, what's going on is you've got the sons of Dan, and then you've got the enemy comes, right? And there's a marsh. And she tells them, the sons of Dan, stay out of the water. And then beat the drums and draw them in. And so the enemy comes and they're in the water. The leader of the Edomites sent forth his chariots into the shallows of the river. Then did a silver beast descend from the cloud in the likeness of a great bird, and spat bolts of lightning from its wings into the water, and the horses of the chariots died. And the men of the chariots shook as with palsy, fell to the waters and drowned. Then a great flame emitted from the mouth of the beast, and the host of the Edomites were consumed. What the hell is the silver beast? This is where I need your help.
Spaceships.
Okay, I'm a skeptic, okay? But I can't come up with anything else. That's a frickin' spaceship, right? Church doesn't want that in the Bible either, do they? This is amazing. I mean, this is the first time I've shown this. Oh, this is like frickin'.
I don't know who the Edomites are, though. I don't know who the Edomites are.
They're a group. I talked to Jerry Lutkin. He's a biblical. He knows all about these guys. I can't tell you. It's too much to wrap my head around right now. I'll get it.
So it's a tribe.
It was a group that were enemies of the sons of Dan. This is all happening in Israel.
I never heard of the sons of Dan either.
Yeah.
One of the tribes of Israel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So this is all new stuff to me too. And this isn't my stuff. I don't know this, but I'm learning, and it's like freaking me out, okay? Just saying. It's freaking me out in a good way. I don't mean to say it like I'm kind of like, okay, I'm one of you guys now. I love you guys. I mean, you're fun to be with. I mean this sincerely. I don't know about you guys, but this has been just a fantastic cruise. And, thanks to Susan for all this. But you guys are super cool, and I really am having fun. So I hope you guys are. I feel like I can say like shit and, tell you how I really feel about this stuff, because this just blows my mind. It really does. The silver beast.
So nobody's calling you crazy?
I don't give a shit if they call me crazy. So what?
Well, considering the
No, I
age
mean,
of this
people
stuff,
here is not calling you crazy.
I like crazy. I'm sorry.
considering the age of all this and then the descriptions, it's clearly, who would make this up?
You can't make it up.
No.
This is, I mean, if you guys had any idea how complicated this story is, how vast it is, how much stuff we have, everything is encrypted. I mean, who would make this up?
Yeah, it'd be one of the biggest conspiracies ever
And-
if it was.
Well, exactly. And what's the end game?
Yeah.
Where's the joke? Where's the laugh, right?
But you gave a pretty wide range of time period when I think you said 13, first was 13 something, then 1500.
Oh, 1200. Well, you go back to, now we're going back to biblical times.
Yeah.
We're going back to Egypt, for God's sakes, right? I mean, you couldn't, I mean, if this is like an Outlander series of novels is what this story is, right? I mean, you should make a movie out of this. It'd be fantastic, you know? It's not fake. This is the story. Look, I am a Templar. I'm a member of a number of different orders, and I know a lot of shit. I know this is right. There's too much that connects with our tradition, and the tradition is like, you think you guys think it's cool. They love it. But a lot of the stuff, they know parts of this, and it all connects. So anyway. Okay, now this, how much time do we have? Do I have time to tell you a story that'll really freak you out? You will never forget. What time is it? 45 minutes? Yeah, I think I do. Okay, so in 1973, a wealthy woman's husband died who was a politician, and she had a young daughter, and she ended up marrying a real shithead. A guy who was he was part of the Hells Angels. No, he was bad. And he thought he beat his wife to death, but she survived. She had brain damage and stuff, but she survived. And he kidnapped the daughter. She was 8 years old. And they ended up going up into the Catskills. They found out later that they went to his dad's cabin. No running water, no electricity, up in the mountains. And so because she was married to a well-known politician, they called in the military. And they flew a helicopter over, and they saw that there were motorcycles parked there, but they didn't want to use local law enforcement, so they sent in Don, Bill, John Drake, I forget the other guy. And their mission was to go in and just do recon. You know, is she alive? What's the situation? And then get out, report back, and then we'll send in law enforcement, actually the military. So they had stripped her naked, tied her to a tree, and the little girl, and they were going to kill her by exposure, hypothermia. No sexual assault, no beatings, just have her die that way, because they didn't want that to be used against them. Anyway, so then so Don and those guys are in the woods, right? And they're setting up booby traps. And it was Don's job, because he was the lock picker. It was his job to slither down and check on, her name was Haley, and make sure she was okay, and he did that. He's telling me this story. He said, I whispered in her ear, and I said to her, we're going to get you out of here. And she had tape over her mouth, and then the candle went on in the room, in the cabin. Don gets out of there, and the guy comes out, and there's 3 other guys and one of the guy's girlfriends, so there's 5 of them. And he comes out to take a piss, and he had a thing of orange juice, and he took a razor blade and he slit the duct tape on her mouth, and he gave her the straw and gave her some of the orange juice. Well, you would think that that was a kind gesture, right? Well, actually what it did is it sped up her metabolism, and it made the hypothermia actually kick in more. And then he urinated on her. Don's watching all this in the woods, right? Pissed, I'm sure.
You mean the dad? Is that?
This guy. He wasn't her father. Stepfather. Yeah, he married the mother, and what he wanted to do was get the money, right? So he thought he killed the wife, but he didn't. She survived. And he's going to kill Haley, so he gets all the money. That was the plan. So Don comes back when he had to wait. They said 45 minutes after the candle goes out. He didn't wait that long because she was, shivering and stuff. So he goes down there. He picks the first 2 locks. The third one he can't get, so he's got to saw it. He's telling me this whole thing. I'm like, hurry up, So he finally gets her free. He put sweater on her, and he picks her up and he starts to carry her off, right? He takes the duct tape off and he starts going up this little hill, and he slipped on the leaves and he dropped her, and she yelped, and they heard it. It's on, right? So these guys come scrambling out, and John Dre, what's that guy? There was a guy who carried a sawed-off shotgun all the time. Don goes, I heard the blast, because what's his name went, there was a little rock quarry nearby. He said that guy was dead. He said another guy went running down this trail, and John Drake had set up, he had been in Vietnam, and he set up a trap that spike went into the guy, and he bled out. He was dead. And then the other guy with the girlfriend ran to the motorcycles, and Jackson had booby-trapped the motorcycles. Boom! But they both lived. And at the end of this report, there's an epilogue. That guy became a preacher. Now the bad guy is going after Don. So Don's running in the wood, and he's carrying Haley, right? 6'8", and this is 1973. And they were going along the ditch, and there was an old railroad bed, like for hiking and stuff. The railroad tracks were gone. And so Don sets her down in the ditch, and he goes up on the top of the railroad bed to check it out. And he turns around, and the guy's like this, with the gun at his forehead. And he goes, so long, MF. Didn't fire.
Oh my God.
And I'm sitting there listening, I swear to God, this is what happened. I'm listening to this story, and I'm like, what? What do you mean it didn't go off? It didn't go off. I go, what happened? He fell dead. Did you stab him? Did you choke him? No. What happened? He had a heart attack and died. I'm like, shut up. What can I tell you? The guy died.
I thought Haley maybe got up and
Yeah. I might change the story next time. The bad guy died. He was a little overweight. Obviously, he was stressed, right? And he had a heart attack. He was in his early 40s or 45, whatever. He's dead. So I'm like, yeah, good. So I'm like, holy crap. That's not the end of the story. What else? He said 4 years later, Dan Spartan rented a shooting range. They cleared everybody out, just Don and him. And they go into one of those shooting booths, and Spartan brought not the exact gun, but the same model, right? The same gun. Don took the bullet, and he had it, right? Before the cops came and everybody came, he took the bullet out of the chamber. They put it in the gun. Boom! Don looks at me and he says, Jesus Christ has been my Lord and Savior ever since. In the report is a picture of that bullet, and you can see 2 strikes. One off to the side and one right in the middle that discharged.
The first one where it didn't go off.
Yep.
The second one where it did.
So, that's amazing, right? Wow. The picture's in there. You can see it. Anyway, so Haley, her mother recovered pretty well. Haley told Don a story about how her grandmother, her mother's mother, found a gold mine in upstate Vermont. Swear to God. And so as gratitude, she gave that mine. She showed Don and Spartan where that mine was. And they mined it for 2 years. They pulled out 2 years. They pulled out about $1 million worth of gold. And I've been there. You can't mine it anymore, but I looked at the geology. There's a shear zone there, and there's mineralization, perfect for gold, right? So she gives them this gold mine. So they're in this mine, and it's old, right? It's an old shaft. And as you go in on the left side, there was a wall like this, and there was a symbol carved on it. I might have it here. I don't remember if I put it on. I think I did. And they realized that it was a stone had been put in place. So they got a demolitions guy. He drilled in. They got a thing that flared out, and they pulled the stone out, and there was a hidden chamber in there. And there was like a recess, and they reach in, and there was like a leather pouch. And inside, this has been retyped, but it was written on parchment, a cryptogram. Yeah, and so they photographed it, and then they rewrote it, and when they brought it out of the cave, it just disintegrated. It just fell apart once it hit the fresh air. So anyway, that was in 1980. And she was like 15 at the time or something. And I'm not making the story up. I've read the report. I've got it on my computer. So what do I got here now? Kidnapped by the bikers. It was 73, not 75. Spartan group, Don and Bill, rescued her. She gave them a gold mine her grandmother left her. Cryptogram found hidden inside the recess in the gold mine behind the Tanit carving. That's the carving. That's a picture of the carving on that stone. Do you know what Tanit is? That's the ancient Phoenician goddess Tanit. And they would pray to her. That's Virgo, the constellation of Virgo. But anyway, that was the carving. That's a picture of it. I mean, this is a long time ago, but so what's it been? 43 years now? They could never decode that cryptogram until the Spartan box came along. What was the anagram? New Amsterdam. So we tried it, and it worked on this one. So 40-something years later, we finally get the anagram, the cipher phrase, and it worked. So this is another part of the book of the Wars of the Lord. The Templars found this gold mine, right? I don't want to have pictures of this yet because I don't want it out there. But I'm just going to tell you what it is. It talks about Yahweh. You know who Yahweh is, right? That's the Hebrew name for God. But what it tells you in here is that the Hebrew name from God is actually two words, Yah and Weh. Male, female. Dual gendered. Just like the hooked X. It's the same thing. And actually, do you guys remember 2 nights ago when I went through that thing real fast about the rabbi scholar?
Both male and female.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I read this and I'm like, yeah, this is just like, this is perfect for me.
It goes back to the Sumerian gods on it.
Yeah, it's the dual gendered. And we know what happened when Christianity came along, right? Can't have those ladies. Certainly not at the same level as the male God, right? I mean, what bullshit is that? But this is one of the things the church isn't going to put up with that, are they? Especially that word. So here's another cryptogram that came last May. So Dave Ryan was the cryptographer for the agency. He's the one that was involved in Misha and that alternate resurrection story. Remember about Jesus? He was involved in all this stuff. But I remember he was particularly involved with a guy in Portugal that helped him figure that out. So anyway, when he retired in like 2008 to Florida, Don went down to visit him. And he went in this room and he was there with Dave's wife. And she showed him these wall hangings that were hideous. And she says, "Oh, what do you think of these, Don?" He goes, "Oh, those are beautiful." What are you going to say, right? So then he goes in the other room and Dave said to Don, "What'd you say that for?" He goes, "I was trying to be diplomatic, you know." But Dave died in 2018, and then later that year, Don gets a box. She sent him those 2 ugly wall hangings. So it pays to be nice, right? So last year, he calls me, "I think I found another thing." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I went in my shed." Remember when Remember when the picture fell apart?
Yeah.
He kept all this crap in his shed. And he goes in there and he's clearing stuff out. And he goes, I was going to throw these away, but then he goes, I couldn't do it. And then I dropped this big heavy thing and one of them broke, so I got one left. He goes, I brought it in the house. And he said he was walking and he had set it on the floor because it's pretty cluttered in there. And he said he accidentally kicked it and it bounced around and he heard something inside of it. So what do? I get in the car and I drive to New York and we opened it. There was a space in the back. And there was an envelope in there about this big and it was fat. It said, "For Don." I'm not making this up. This is how these guys do this stuff, right? You don't just give it to him. He's got to earn it, right? And this is what unfolded.
Cipher?
It's a cryptogram. Yeah. So this one was hard. But anyway, it's got 13 parts. There's that number again, right? And then these here, Ask a Land Claim, A.K. Candle Saga, and the date of 1898. This message happened in 1898. And if you look right down here closely, CLY. And there's the date of 1898. 13 parts. So this one was hard. That's the anagram, right? And you know how we figured it out? 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you know how many words have 4 A's in them? Like 3. You have to figure out the code word, Sacandaga Lake, which is in this message. Actually, there's 5 A's in that cipher phrase. Number the letters above, just like we did before, right? And then you go, there's 13 parts, so you take 13 and everything is this way, you line them up this way. And you do it for all 13, and then you read the message. Line them vertically, read horizontally. And, oh, that's right. This had another layer to it because at the very bottom was the alphabet. They gave us the alphabet. But CLY he had encrypted it and he just gave it. And then there was 1 through 10 symbols too, because each of the groupings 1 through 13 were numbered with different symbols. So we had to convert the symbols after we got them in order. This one was hard. And then read it horizontally. So, yeah. Okay. Okay.
Buried in the lake.
Now I want you guys to pay very close attention and help me out. Seriously. Okay? And this has to stay in this room. No, it doesn't say a man. Remember, everything is continuum, right? So I'm putting the spaces in where I think they belong. But just because I put a space between A and MON doesn't mean that's right. It could be Aman as one word. Well, I don't know. I don't even know if that's right. But I'm just telling you how we just did this like within 9 months ago.
I just thought you meant maybe a god or something.
Well, or maybe something else. I'm thinking ET. The likeness about the eyes, blue, the likeness of a man? What do you mean a likeness of a man? It's either a man or it's something else that looks like a man. Right? I mean, look, I don't have the answer. I'm just reading it like you guys are. Now remember, in the book of the Wars of the Lord, we're talking about the Lord and the goddess, right? That's connected to the silver beast, right? Now he's saying the Lord needs him again. Who is the Lord? Now we think of some biblical thing, right? Well, who says that's right?
Maybe it's Anu.
I mean, I don't know. So you guys can help me chime in. Please do, because I don't know what the hell this is.
It's interesting, you speak from one language and go to English.
He just switches. It's almost like, when I read this, it's not like they're talking. It's like this. That's the way I interpret this. It's like, I can't understand you. Okay, well, how about this? Boom.
But a lot of cases you read of abductions and so on, like some people say, I got the message Templar. Some people say, I could hear them like my language, but their mouth didn't move.
Well, that's kind of what it sounds like here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've read thousands of those cases.
Yeah. So why couldn't that be going on here, right? Remember, I'm not an ET person, but I don't know what else this can be.
So he spoke to him, but not in his tongue English.
So then he switched.
Then he switched. And then he said the one sentence in English.
But he also said he could understand them too. But he said, but you're not talking my language.
But it's not like there's no indication that they're verbally communicating. It seems like they're just, oh, you can't hear me? Okay, how about this? Yeah, okay, boom.
So he might have started off with telepathy, and it was stranging him out or freaking him out. And then he moved over. Then
And maybe he did verbalize.
And he switched over to a more verbal content in his head, right? Follow me?
Yeah, I follow you. Yeah. That's kind of where I'm going with this too. Okay. This is just where he's going, and he's doing something. He's going to get something.
Is these instructions from this ET guy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Lake Sacandaga. This won't make any sense to you guys, but we know more about that. He's going to a place, he's meeting with people, he's giving code words, they're giving him the phrases back. We do this in Freemasonry all the time. You know, it's like when we do degrees, I'll say something to you. It's like if I meet somebody and I think he might be a Mason, I'll say, are you a traveling man? And if you're a Mason, you know what that is, and you'll say, and if you're with a group of people, nobody knows what you're talking about. And you'll say, yeah, I spent a lot of time on the East Coast, right? In the East, where the master sits. And then you know your brothers, and then you'll do a handshake, and then off you go. So they're doing this here.
Okay, so, this is the likeness of Aman.
Aman.
And then it says in here, Aman, the god of, Aman, or A-M-U-N, god of the air, was one of the 8 primordial Egyptian deities.
Interesting.
Amon's role evolved over the centuries during the Middle Kingdom. He became the king of the deities in the New Kingdom and became...
Of the ETs?
No, deities. Deities.
Oh, deities. Okay. Wow. Well, okay. It has come to pass that I now have unto my own 2 stone gold. He was paid with gold ore. And this is up in that area where that gold mine is. And there's gold up there. We know there's gold up there. With which I have stilled little thunder. That's his girlfriend. Obviously, she's native. So I know the lights are of angels, yet all are not of the Lord. Some are of his brother. Help me. What the hell does that mean?
Fallen angels.
Fallen angels,
Who's
so,
the
which
brother
are not
of the
good
Lord?
people.
So they're saying
Well, they're not biblical angels. They got to be space people, right?
Or ETs.
Or ETs. Different races of ETs? Is that what he's talking about?
Or they're real enough that he doesn't, like if they're ETs and they're real enough, he doesn't feel they're actually God himself, right?
I have no idea. There's no wrong answer here. When I saw the one the old one and my little thunder with their long black hair and a new garment of white deer hide adorned with quill work and her eyes wide, a big smile on her face. It was all I ever needed. The old one and Octalani, that's Choctaw for blue eyes, embraced me, and together we walked to the lodge. So has passed the scroll of the wars of the Lord from the world of men. Know by the sigil of my ancestors, CLY, all I write is true. And that's his Indian name, Talico, which means gray eagle, CLY. So what happened was he went and recovered the copy of the Book of the Wars of the Lord that had been brought there from the temple of the goddess. Remember I told you half the documents were still there? In 1656, they moved them all out. They took everything to Montreal, except they diverted and brought the Book of the Wars of the Lord to this place. And it was his job to go recover it and give it to the ETs. Because of just the sampling that we have, the 2 samples, it's no longer amongst the world of men. How else do you interpret that? I jump in if you have a different... I think he gave it to the ETs because the humans couldn't handle it yet.
Why would the ET, is that why the ETs wanted it back?
Because humanity was too stupid. They were too under the control of the church, and by fear and by all that nonsense that they do. I'm sorry, I'm just going to call it what it is, right? And I think what it was is, we're not ready yet. This is 1898. This is over 100 years ago. So they gave it back. But guess what?
Everybody has it.
No. We have it. We got enough right now.
Well, you have it by way of connecting the dots.
Well, we finally figured out what the message said 40 years later. We got that one part. And then the one was folded up and written in English in the document. My point is, I'm starting to believe there's a reason why we got this stuff now. There's a reason why I'm telling you, and I'm going to tell everybody on TV about this stuff. And the church is going to be pissed. Be pissed. Get over it. You guys had your day. It's over. It's time the world knew this stuff. I'm serious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally serious.
So you don't think maybe Vatican has one of those?
Yeah, I know they got it. They're sitting on it. Of course they have it.
That's what I'm thinking.
They're going to be pissed when they hear this. Too bad. It's time. So this whole elevation of the feminine, the dual-gendered nature, why is that so hard to handle?
I think the thing about swapping bodies
Well, yeah.
is really going to be it's going to blow Easter Sunday out of hell.
Well, sorry. Too bad. We'll make a new holiday. We'll call it ET Day. Right? No, I'm serious. I'm dead serious. And now, I've always sort of, yeah, you guys can have the ET stuff. I got my own stuff. I can't not talk about it now.
So will that be on History Channel?
Wow. We're talking with them right now. Nothing's a deal until it's a deal, right? So I don't know. We'll see. They're going to want this. I know they're going to want it, but they got to make the right deal. Otherwise, I'll screw them. I'll go somewhere else. It's not about, I don't care about being on TV. I've been on TV. And frankly, careful what you wish for. Anyway, message 4. Decipher using one letter over method. This one's easy. So A is actually B, B is C, C is D, and so on. The Roman numeral dates are kind of weird. They're bunched. See this one here? That's 13 and 90. The date's 1390. This message is about stuff that happened in 1390. That's the date. The funny thing here is that you see the V with the dot? That's actually a W. That is V, meaning the letter V. If it doesn't have a dot, it's the number 5. So they had to do something to modify it so you know what which one's a Roman letter, which one's a letter, right? So these are W's.
Well, W is a double V.
Well, in this case, VW, right? So if it's a V, the letter is actually W. You'd be surprised. It's simple, but it's harder than you think to craft the message. But you know what's on this page too? A hooked X. Every one of them. They all have a hooked X. It's an acknowledgement of God. I'm thinking of you. Bless this. Protect this, right? I'm not going to read it, but what I want you to know is from there, this guy's all alone, right? They go south to the temple of the goddess. We embrace. I will never see him again. I am alone. From there, Kay told me, who's Kay? Kay is all over these things. But who's Kay? It's them. It's him. It's that same guy, probably. Look at this. As Lionel I took refuge with the Ivri, that's the old word for Hebrews, in the valley of Cold, and from Cephad, that's in Israel, for they revere the He in who He. Do you remember I talked about Samos work? Yahweh is actually, you pull it apart and you go like this, and it's who He, male, female. They revere the He, the feminine of male, female, of the dual-gendered God. What have I been telling you? The hooked X. The goddess is on top. I'm just going to say it, okay? I was right all along. Nice going, Scotty. One more. This message is long. 24 sections of 12 lines each. This is one section. 6,609 characters. I see you. I love you. I saw you the other time too. I know. This message is mostly about Oak Island. Half of the information that's in these documents, I'm not even telling you about the Oak Island stuff. But this message is mostly details about Oak Island. I know the whole story. It's actually pretty amazing. And I never wanted to hear another word about Oak Island, and then I got punched in the face by these documents. Pardon?
So what's new about Oak Island?
We don't have enough time. So what's cool about this one, you know what the cipher phrase was? The power of God is within you. It occurs throughout the message 13 times. And the reason it's in there is because when you're decoding this thing, and I'll show you my work, one page of my work, there were like 11 pages of my work. You get to a point where all of a sudden you see T-H-E-P, oh, here we go. And if it spells out right, then you know you're doing it right. If you miss a letter, you screwed it up, and you got to go back, and oh my God, it took me 2 weeks to do this, once I knew what I was doing. But the power of God is within you is the key to knowing that you're doing it right. The letter K occurs 12 times. It's just random. It's usually associated with numbers, but it's just K. And then the last time you see it, it's spelled out K. The 13th time. And, of course, this is page 1, hooked X. This is blessed. This is protected. It's a sacred symbol. So this is my work right here. This is one page. I have 11 pages of this. I did this in February, end of February. We just got this stuff from Roberta. The second tranche of stuff was 30 pages of cryptograms. That's all I've been doing for like 2.5 months is this shit. Jeez, I'm sorry, but God. I screwed up here, screwed up here, screwed up here, screwed up here. I mean, the power of God is within you was the cipher. You start it right off with the power of God is within you. That's the first thing you get. And then down here, you get it again. And that's how I knew I'd screwed this up, because those letters didn't line up. They were wrong. 13 times throughout the message. But it kept you on track and let you know that you were doing it right. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Brilliant, isn't it? It's brilliant. Now there's a whole bunch of stuff, but this is the end. The Mickey Macs, that's the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia. That's the local native people up there. Bring us squash, beans. The power of God is within you. That's the last one. And maize ground, so ground up food. We kill 14 bear and 16 deer. We share with them. They show us how to make coats and clothes. It is $13.95. Lionel VI grows strong like his father. He has 2 sons and 1 girl. I am his second son. So he's Lionel VII. Uriel pledged to the service of the angel K. Who's K? Remember in the other cryptogram, AK Candle K, Saga K? Who's K? He's got to be an alien.
An angel. It's an angel. It's an angel.
Well, what's an angel?
An alien.
Well, okay. So this is that book I was telling you about. I'll just go through it quick. This is 2020, right? Remember, I published my Hooked X book and all this goddess stuff and the dualism and all that in 2009. And I've been alone, fighting the academics who think it's all crap. Well, it's not. The Hebrew name of God, which is spelled this way, but is Yahweh, has not been uttered in public for over 2,000 years. Some thought the lost pronunciation was Jehovah or Yahweh, but Sameth traces the name to the late Bronze Age and argues that it was expressed as Hu-He. It's in the document.
Wow.
How did they know that? That's how you know it's legit. You can't make this up. Hebrew for he, she. They venerate Hu-He, which is the feminine. I just love it. Among the Jewish mystics, we learned this has been an open secret.
So when was this Mark 7th person?
He wrote this 2020. It just came out. Just came out. And a brother Mason turned me on to it because he knew about my research. He said, dude, you're going to like this. He was right. Yeah. You can buy this book. It's a quick read. I read it in 3 days. I mean, it's great. No, no, this is another author. This guy lives in New York. I'm trying to track him down. He's going to love my stuff because it backs him up. So he talks about the first time that the immutable word of God appears is 1400 BCE. It's the time of Akhenaten when the Hooked X starts. They started at the same time. And it was the 3-letter word for God, right? Then you come forward, he writes about this. This is sort of a history of this. In 850 BC is the Tetragrammaton, Yod-He, Vav-He, right? See the downward pointing triangle? That's the feminine, remember, of the Hooked X? And it's now in the Torah. That's the name of God. Of course, in 70 AD, the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, and the name went underground and was not uttered for 2,000 years. But after he wrote his book, he found out that he wasn't the first to discover this in modern times. Michelangelo Lanci was a Vatican librarian, and in like 1810, something like that. Professor of sacred philosophy. He was a philologist, fluent in Greek and other languages. He revealed the secret of the Tetragrammaton and its dual-gendered nature. Published it in 1827, and his paper was immediately suppressed by the church. Boy, that's a shocker, isn't it? Can you guys keep it down back there?
You know what? I came in to say I love you.
Aww, talk about completely disarming me. Wow. Let that be a lesson to me, right? Anyway, one of his students, he just accepted it, okay? The church doesn't want it. I'm just going to leave it alone. But one of his students that he taught it to brought it to Albert Mackey. He is a Masonic scholar from the mid-1800s, late 1800s. I read all of his stuff. And in 1869, he published it. So it was out there. He just didn't know about it because he's not a Mason. So then my hooked X symbol, right? I took you through it. Monotheistic dualism. The lady's on the top, right? With the daughter and the Trinity and all that. It started at the same time, the exact same time. 1400, as Samos says, right? And so we go to 70 AD, and remember I told you about the Telpiat tomb and the Jesus, son of Joseph Ossuary? Thank you. Hold that for me. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So about 8 years ago, these scholars in Jerusalem contact me. They send me this picture and they said, hey, Scott, we found this on the Jesus ossuary. We think it's a star symbol that's related to an ancient Jewish story. What do you think? And I wrote back and I said, dudes, that's no star symbol. That's a monogram of two symbols. My hooked X and the Tau cross. The hooked X is a stonemason straight line version. Come on in. We're having a party. What the hell? Let her in. Come on. Maybe she doesn't want to come in. Okay, fine. The straight line stonemason's version of the Hebrew Aleph, which is the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet. The Tau is the last. Alpha, Omega, beginning and end. And it's on Jesus' ossuary. Are you kidding me? Let that sink in. That's amazing. But you'll never hear about it. Except for me. Except for me. And then in 1362, we find it 22 times on this fake runestone, right? Olaf Ullmann knew what this was, didn't he? I mean, it's laughable, right? It's just, this alone is laughable. This is the most important historical artifact in the history of this country for sure, and this continent, and the world thinks it's a fake. This is embarrassing for humanity, I'm sorry. And Tim Hogan talked about the hooked X and how it's abbreviated. You can say L, right? That's God, but it's spelled Aleph Lamed, which is A-L, abbreviated to A, which is the Aleph, which is the hooked X. It has a numerical value of 1. It represents oneness with God. The Aleph is the first letter. It's used for A in the 5 runic inscriptions found in North America, including the Kensington runestone. 14th, 15th centuries. It's analogous to the Hebrew Aleph, which is sacred, secret symbol used by the Templars, whose ancestry is Jewish, going back to the 12 tribes. It's a symbol for deity. That's why it shows up in all those documents. Because CLY knew the secret. He understood that if we want these documents to be protected, the hooked X has got to be there because it was acknowledgement of deity. That's why the monks carved it. That's why they wrote it. For future initiates like me and now you to recognize. Because you guys, whether you realize it or not, I just initiated you. It means to teach, right? So now you know the secret. In this case, was to bless and protect that sacred land claim of the Templars, which is now United States, founded by Freemasonry. And you're welcome. Thank you. And we're done. That went pretty good. I was only a couple minutes over, right?